to sit on the front row, isn't there?
You gotta get here early to get a good back row seat. Okay, so I've got to know, because I heard that this is the case. So how do you pronounce where you're from?
Pronounce what?
I'm asking the Richies how you pronounce it. Colorado. He didn't say it right. Okay, where's Matt? Matt, how long you lived in this area?
I told you I was having a hard time acclimating.
See, I heard that there was a certain way that if you can tell if you're from Colorado City by how you pronounce it.
Okay.
So you have verified that for me. What? Well, you are blessed. Yeah.
What'd she say? What'd she say back there?
She said that they couldn't hear me.
Oh.
And I said that they're blessed. All right, so if one of y'all needs to turn up that volume over there on the wall, feel free to do so. And I'll turn it up here. For those of you that would like to hear me. And then Gary comes in. No, we're good.
Well, you might tell Siri that we are Lubbock, not Lubbock. Because Siri calls us Lubbock.
Do you want me to hand those back there to them? Jack is offering his hearing aids for you if you'd like to put them in. Well, yeah, if you have, no, we didn't buy earbuds for everyone. I mean, that's expensive. No, in case you didn't, how many of you tried the new listening assisted system in the auditorium this morning? A couple of folks. All right, so some more over here. We just started it today. I've already gotten a thumbs up from one person for it. The nice thing about it, there were instructions that came in an email this week. There's instructions on the wall as you go in to the auditorium this side and that side. And if you just need some help, go to the AV booth and they'll help you out. Or I'll help you out if you catch me after class. But you use your phone to do it. And it will send a signal if you've got Bluetooth hearing aids. It'll send a signal to those. If you've got earbuds of some kind, either ones you plug in or the ones that you send the signal to, you can use those, and it goes through your phone. You can control the volume that way, and whenever you get tired of Dale, you just go click, and you're done. It was kind of fun. I used to edit the sermon to put on the website. And that was the best part of it.
If you could just pause and then come back, would be better.
I don't think it'll let you pause and then come back. I don't think it does that. But so if you want to take a little nap and then catch up later on. Yeah. Okay, so Jack was threatening to take a bite out of my apple this morning. He didn't do it, so I'll give it to him afterwards. What does an apple and the story of Jacob have to do with each other? Anybody? Fell off the same tree. Yeah. Not far from that. Because the old saying is, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Yeah. And we're going to notice that in today's lesson as we go to Genesis chapter 29. And going, by the way, I'm going by this clock up here because the battery's dead. And so we will never get to 10:15. I did that last week and it was ahead. That's why y'all got out so early. So I don't know if any of you have ever done what's known as a family genogram. Anybody have heard of a family genogram? Yeah. Family genograms are good because they not only tell you, it's working on a family tree and knowing kind of where you come from, who you come from, or whom you come from. But it also gives you other details about your family history. It can tell you about medical history, but it'll also tell you about behavioral history. Whenever Angela and I got married, one of the things they asked us to do was to do a family genogram for each of us, and one of the reasons was to help us understand ourselves better, but also understand the individual that we're marrying better. and she married me anyway. But let me give you an example. Whenever I was studying about family genograms, there was this guy that the father was really concerned about him because he had become an alcoholic, and he was just really destroying his life with alcohol. Well, the dad was a preacher, and so the preacher was worried about his son. Well, they did one of these, and they started talking about their family history. And it just so happened that, okay, you got the son and you got the dad, who's a preacher. It just so happens that the dad's dad, the grandfather, was an alcoholic. Really messed up his family life. Well, it just so happened that the granddad's dad was a preacher. And I think they went back 2 more generations that his dad was an alcoholic, and his dad was a preacher. Very unusual stuff. You get into a genogram and you learn some things about your family history, and you may find a few things about why you tend to do some of the things that you do. They also say that, chip off the old block, like father like son, like mother like daughter. And when we get into Jacob's life, it's also true about Jacob in many ways. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. And what's interesting about Jacob is it's not only his immediate family, whenever you talk about Isaac and some of the things that happened there, but Jacob is going on a journey, and he winds up with relatives back in Padan Aram, around Haran, and that's where we see more of Jacob's story. But what I want us to notice is, in our story, one of the things I want you to listen for is, what do we see about Jacob in his journey? How does Jacob change in his journey? And why does he change? For example, early on in his story, we read these. In chapter 25, verse 27, Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. In some translations, he lived a quiet life. He was blameless, some will say. He never got into trouble. He was a homebody. Later on, we read, Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." What we see in Jacob, we know him to be a deceiver. We know that he likes to play tricks. He's already swindled the birthright from Esau. And now you've got a situation where, in this one, Rebekah comes up with this scheme in order to get the blessing from Isaac and to give to Jacob instead of to Esau. And he's a little bit timid. He's a little bit hesitant because he's afraid of what might happen if he gets found out. As we move forward in the story, what kind of person do we see Jacob to be? So let's go over to chapter 29 and let's read some of these opening verses here. Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the open country with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said, "and here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture." "Oh, we can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." And while he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. And as soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Jacob said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." Okay, so Bob Kaiser, when he came in today, he said he had come up with one word to describe our study of Genesis, and that word was haberdashery. And I didn't have a chance to really get him to explain it, except I got the figure, kind of got the intent of it being it's kind of confusing and kind of messy and that sort of thing. And yet, yeah.
With a capital C.
With a capital C, okay. And but God's working anyway.
Amen.
What do you notice about what's happening here? What jumps out at you? Another confusing story.
Jacob's looking for kinsman.
He is looking for kinsmen. He's looking for somebody that he can relate with. He knows this is where he's been sent to this place to find Laban and hopefully to find a wife. So he's looking for relatives.
I think he was glad what he found happened to be the pretty one.
He was glad that the one he found was the pretty one.
That's where it was.
Yeah, yeah. Rachel comes walking along. She's a shepherd. Do you notice what Jacob tells the shepherds? They all gather around this well. The well has this large stone on it. They wait for all the flocks to show up before they roll this stone away so that the sheep can get water. And the shepherds know the custom. They know the rules, and they tell Jacob, this is the way it is. But what does Jacob tell them? Go ahead and go do it anyway. Now, why does he tell them to go ahead and go do it? I wonder if he sees a pretty girl coming his way, and he wants some time alone with her. So he goes to shepherds. Y'all go on. Go ahead and water your sheep. It's okay. Really? No, we can't do that. That's not the rules. So what does Jacob do? He rolls the stone away. Now, do you get the impression, though, that this stone is large enough? It says it's a large stone. How many people would normally take to roll the stone away, do you think?
By the way, they didn't do it together.
Well, the shepherds, they needed, it appears, more than one to roll this stone away. Jacob takes upon himself, first of all, he bucks their custom and their rules. You would assume that the flocks who got there first would also get their water first, so he jumps Rachel up to the front of the line, and he takes upon himself to roll the stone away without anybody else's help. What do you notice about Jacob?
Show off.
Show off.
A little show off? he seems to be quite a bit more assertive, a lot more confident. He has lived his life, at least in his daddy's eyes, in the shadow of his older brother. Any of you that have lived your lives in the shadow of an older sibling, you know what Jacob is talking about. If you're the older sibling that your siblings have lived in the shadow of, like mine, no, I'm just kidding. You don't know what he's talking about. But now he shows up and he's got this new assertiveness, this new confidence to put himself out there, even to be rejected by the ones who are from the land there. How do you attribute the difference?
His dad wasn't working.
His dad wasn't there? Maybe. He's
His-
outside of that element.
His dream,
Yeah.
they're going to bow down to him. He's going to rule.
It wasn't so much of a dream about ruling as it was, remember, he's been on this journey and God appears to him in a dream with angels going up and down the staircase, and God communicates and makes this covenant with Jacob, the same covenant he made with Abraham and with Isaac. And you remember Jacob's words, "Surely the Lord was in this place, and I didn't know it." What kind of difference does knowing the presence of the Lord make in your life?
Hunger,
Makes you stronger? Why is that?
you're willing to go out and do His will.
Okay.
Confidence. If the Lord is with me, who can be against me?
It adds confidence because His power is the one at work. His strength is the one at work. His presence is what counts. Anybody else? It makes you humble. Knowing that God is present, that you're not God, He is, brings some humility.
Jacob made a vow there.
He did. He made a vow to the Lord there. And his vow was, God, if I'm seeing that you're taking care of me, then I will worship you and I will come back to this place and I will honor you. And so he's got that in his mind about God keeping his promises to Jacob. Maybe some of us are more timid. Maybe some of us are more reserved, especially about our faith, because we've never really come to terms with God's presence in our lives at all times. His presence should infuse us with that confidence and that courage to speak for Him, to stand for Him, to live for Him. We start seeing, I think, this difference in Jacob's life, and I think it has to come from this experience that he's been on, where he's gone and he's seen this vision and he understands that God is with him, that God has called him to a bigger purpose than himself. He is a part of this covenant that his daddy's been telling him about. He may have heard it from his granddaddy as well. He understands that he's a part of a bigger thing going on. When do we know that we're part of something bigger than ourselves?
And he said he would even give a tenth of what he had,
Yeah,
part of the vow.
Whoops.
he would give back to God. Let's go on through the story here. The more interesting part of the story. This is part of the story. There are several things in Genesis, and this is probably the big one. I just kind of scratch my head and say, huh? After Jacob, the last part of verse 14, after Jacob had stayed with Laban for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you're a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel." And Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, and they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to make love to her." Okay, stop there for just a minute. Anybody wonder, what are weak eyes? Anybody have other translations? What does it say about Leah?
Mine said they were soft eyes.
Soft eyes is one translation. Tender eyes? Delicate eyes.
They didn't sparkle.
They did not sparkle. Is that what yours says, or is that your interpretation?
That's what it said.
That's what yours says. Okay. I try and get these different ones here. So what does it mean? Weak
Plain
eyes?
Jane.
What?
Plain Jane.
Plain Jane eyes. I know that's not the translation. I know that. That's James' translation there. Yeah. I don't know. Scholars have been trying to translate that forever, and as you can tell, different translations have different words. In the context, what it seems to suggest, some have said that she had an eye malady of some kind, that she had eyes that had some problems with her eyes. Perhaps it was they didn't sparkle, they didn't jump out, they didn't grab your attention. Rachel, on the other hand, is beautiful all over.
It might have been a personality trait, because people that their eyes sparkle, they're more vivacious, they're more
Okay.
alive with life.
You can tell a lot about a person by their eyes, can't you? And what she says, it may be something that indicated personality. Well, you know, whenever I was in school, if you talked about a girl and you said, well, what does she look like? She's got a great personality. And you're telling me that Leah doesn't have both either. Yeah.
But that's so true. You know, you watch these news stories with all the female newscasters,
Uh-huh.
and some across there, and, and the first thing you think, oh, that's a friendly one, or that one is, you know, that one's not very, not very kind of harsh maybe, or whatever, because you can tell with their eyes. At least it looks that way.
The first impression you'll oftentimes
Yeah.
get is from somebody's eyes. That's why I don't
Yeah.
look at anybody.
I thought she was kind. I always thought of her as being kind and little and vivacious.
You thought of her being kind.
She
Okay.
has soft eyes and little and vivacious.
Okay, we'll see if we notice Leah being kind in our story.
No, she's not.
The context suggests that whatever it had to say about the eyes, it meant that there wasn't just a whole lot that attracted people to Leah, especially Jacob. Rachel, on the other hand, boy, she was it. Leah, not so much. But now, in that time, whenever you got a wife for your son, or now Jacob is getting a wife for himself, there was the custom of paying a dowry, a certain amount, in order to obtain this wife. Well, Jacob doesn't have anything. He's left home. He's penniless. So he offers, I'll work for you 7 years in exchange for the hand of your daughter. And Laban makes the agreement. Verse 21, 7 years have passed. Give me my wife. My time is completed. I want to make love to her. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. Now, the way this feast would work, apparently, is that the father of the bride, especially one who was wealthy like Laban, they would announce a 7-day feast. And they would invite, now some translations will say he invited all the men of the community. Some will say he invited all the people of the community. Whichever one it is, he invites all this crowd in order to celebrate this marriage that's taking place. And after the first day of the feast, then the husband and wife, the newlyweds, they would have their wedding night, and then they would celebrate 6 more days of this feast as a celebration of this union together. And so the honeymoon was spent with members of the community here. Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It's not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Tell you what, finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah. And then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years.
I have a note in my Bible as far as the meaning of their names,
Yes?
and Leah meant cow,
Oh!
and Rachel was ewe, a sheep.
Did y'all hear that? Leah, she has a note in her Bible about the meaning of their names. Leah's name means cow. Rachel means ewe, E-W-E, like a ewe lamb or something like that. Very delicate. Cow. I've talked about Angela being a heifer, but I've never. It's biblical. That's what Samson said.
You said they'll get in a lot more trouble.
Yeah, sometime I'll tell you about Moana and the 7 cow woman, but that's another story another time. Yeah, so even by their names, there's an indication of what people thought of them. I'm not even going to try to explain what happens here. How do you have a wedding night? You don't realize that the right woman is in the room with you until the morning. We'll just head-eye problems too.
And ear.
Do what?
I didn't figure out how you could love her so much.
Didn't even know her?
Didn't even know her, yeah.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is, what we see, not so much in how in the world did Jacob do what he did, but how in the world did Laban do how he did. This bait and switch and this amended arrangement that he organizes or he develops for Jacob. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? The deceiver becomes the deceived. The cheater becomes the cheated. Or, as the book of Numbers says, be sure that your sin will find you out. Or we know what it says in Galatians, don't we? You reap what you sow. And then there's a saying that we know around here, and that's it, what goes around comes around. By the way, this what goes around comes around, that is the definition, as I was looking it up, that's the definition that people give to karma. You know, this idea that you either got good karma or bad karma, this kind of this Eastern kind of philosophy, and then if you've done good in your life, then good karma will follow you. If you've done bad things in your life, bad karma is going to follow you. Well, what they've done is they've taken a principle, a truth that God established, and turned it their way, how they're going to word it, how they're going to use it. They're going to talk about it in karma. God's going to talk about it in terms of how He works in our world. Have you noticed this to be true? That a person's sins will eventually find them out. That whatever it is that a person reaps, that's what they're going to sow. Now, what's been your experience with that?
Our culture makes it so that they are little gods. So they feel like that they're what the world revolves around.
The world revolves around them,
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what these say.
That's right.
They can beat that, they can cheat that, and they can create their own outcome.
Yeah.
Okay? Make themselves little gods that way. Anybody else? What's been your experience with this? Have you found it to be true? A person's sins will eventually find them out. That a person will typically reap what they sow.
Yep.
If you plant a button, you're not gonna get a golden tree.
That's pretty good, yeah.
I mean, we teach that in kindergarten. If you plant an apple seed, you're gonna get an apple.
Whatever it is that you put into your life is what's going to be produced. And that's true for us in a couple of different ways. Number one, it's true for us from our own standpoint. Whatever it is that I put into my life, that is typically what I'm going to get out. Now, what God said was in Galatians, if you're going to sow the flesh, then you're going to reap the produce of what the flesh does. If you sow what the Spirit wants to do in your life, then you'll reap what the Spirit wants to accomplish in your life. It's a very important principle. Now, when computers came along, they came up with this little an acronym that said GIGO. G-I-G-O. Remember what GIGO stands for?
Garbage in, garbage out.
Garbage in, garbage out. They knew the principle as well. But from a computer standpoint, computer's only going to give you what you put into it. Well, same thing for us. And so back in my youth group days, they came around and turned that to J-I-J-O. Jesus in, Jesus out. I know it's cutesy, but it works.
Yeah.
What is it that you're putting into your life? What is it that you see your family putting into their lives? And how do you encourage the right things in their life? I had gotten, especially as a young minister, I would talk to young couples and I would ask them, you know, how would you like to grow as a couple? How would you like to grow as a family? And some of them would say things like, you know, I'd really like to learn from some older individuals, people who have been there before, and maybe they could help me learn those things. But, you know, they're really not interested in doing that. And then I'd go talk to older individuals and I say, you know, have you ever thought about going and mentoring or helping a young family and learning how to grow closer to the Lord and closer to one another? Oh, we'd love to do that, but those younger folks, they're just not interested in that. And it was that, boy, right past each other. I've got to tell you, we've got younger folks around here that would love to have relationships with older folks who have been there and have seen what we're talking about here. And I know some of you would love to have those relationships with some younger folks so you can pass along some of those things that you've learned in your life. You'd like to do that in your families. Now, there may be different ways of doing it. There may be effective ways and not effective ways, but it's an important thing that we learn how to do. That's what Jacob is learning. What you put into your life is what you're going to get out of it. Now, it's also true of other folks. I don't know how many times in my ministry I've had somebody who has hurt me in some way or who has betrayed me in some way or is doing something that I don't like, and I would like to take care of it right now. And what some older, more wiser individuals told me was, be patient. Their sins will find them out. Be patient. What goes around comes around. And what I learned was, if I'll wait long enough, that's the thing, isn't it? Waiting. If I wait long enough, God's principle will come around. Other thoughts, your experience with this? It's what Jacob had to learn. Be patient.
Here's what the devil's advocate for him. Those people's sins coming out, it depends upon somebody pointing them out.
Someone helping them to see them for what they are. It's very helpful to interpret life for them. Because you're right, sometimes people will experience the consequences of their actions but never understand what it means or what has happened.
So sometimes being patient and letting their sins find them out, maybe their sins would find them out, or they could be turned around if you stepped in and did something.
If you gave them that interpretation a little bit sooner. That's what Scripture talks about too, speaking the truth. Always in love, always with respect, and you speak truth to them. Good.
Maybe we need to learn Adam and Eve. They didn't die immediately, but they began their journey.
Sometimes it takes a while for the consequences to manifest themselves, doesn't it? It's always in time.
That's the advantage of getting older.
Yeah.
You can look back on your life and see things that you thought were such catastrophes worked for your very best good.
Yeah. Let's go on. Verse 31. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. Again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." So he was named Levi. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "This time I will praise the Lord." So she named him Judah. Then she stopped having children. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?" Then she said, "Here's Bilhah, my servant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and I too can build a family through her." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son." Because of this, she named him Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won." So she named him Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "What good fortune!" So she named him Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "How happy I am! The women will call me happy." So she named him Asher. During wheat harvest, Reuben went out to the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother, Leah. Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too?" "Very well," Rachel said. "He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." So when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. "You must sleep with me," she said. "I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he slept with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, "God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband." So she named him Issachar. Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, "God has presented me a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him 6 sons." So she named him Zebulun. Sometime later she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her, enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, "God has taken away my disgrace." She named him Joseph and said, "May the Lord add to me another son." Haberdashery, is that the right?
Amen.
What do we do with this part of the story? What a mess. Have you ever, I don't know why you were named what you were named. My name, Dewey, came from my grandfather. It was my mom's dad. His name was George Dewey Pendergrass. And so they took the Dewey and they gave that. Now, my dad's dad, his name was TD. He just went by initials. And so they took his initials, TD, swapped them, and gave me Dewey, and then put Todd on it, and then made me Howard. That's where I got my name. I figure it was to settle some kind of a feud that was going on between the families, but I don't know. But what about these names? Where did they come from? They came from the rivalry between Leah and Rachel. This heritage that they're passing along. The first one, his name in affliction. Second one, heard. I've been heard by the Lord. Attached. Now my husband will be attached to me. Praise. I'll praise God because he's given me these sons. Vindication. That's that boy's name. Struggle. Fortune. Happy. Now what about those mandrakes? We don't know a lot about the mandrakes. Many have suggested that it was believed to be an aphrodisiac that was supposed to contribute to help toward conception. The roots themselves, this is one picture of them. I've seen some other pictures that are much more pronounced than this, where they kind of, if you let your imagination go with you, they kind of look like an infant. You got the legs and sometimes arms and things like that. So there is that. But whenever they make this deal over the mandrakes, then the next child that comes out, he's the reward for it. He's been hired, and then the honor. And then you get Joseph, which means taken away and added. What are some lessons to grab from this? Any?
I don't want my kids' names to reflect the attitude or the mood I'm in.
Don't want your kids' names to reflect the attitude or mood that you're in. Well, then stop it. What does it tell us about God? We see what's going on here, and it's very confusing. It's kind of messed up. It's really chaotic. But what do you learn about God in this story? He's the main character, after all. Number one, how many times does it say he remembered this woman? He remembered Leah. She was not the loved one, Rachel was. Scripture is very clear to us that God has a tender heart for the discarded and the vulnerable. And one of the things we see is that as Leah is the one that is not loved, that he blesses Leah with children. He gives her that blessing. Rachel, she's got to wait a while. It doesn't appear that it's anything that Rachel has done. It's not because of anything that she's done wrong that God's punishing her for that. It's just this is God's work in order to bless the one who feels discarded and the one that's vulnerable. I just want us to understand, if you know some folks who are vulnerable and discarded around you, be very careful how your attitude toward them. Because if your attitude is not a tender one and not a sensitive one, you may be fighting against God, whose attitude is sensitive and is tender toward that person. One of the other things we notice over and over again in this is that God is the one who gives children. That's Scripture tells us that God's the one that determines that. Now, we can put a lot of science to it, we can put a lot of medicine to it, and all those kinds of things, but ultimately, God is the one, according to this, that makes his determinations. How he makes those determinations, I don't pretend to try to determine that or understand that. We've got certain situations in our own family where if you try to make those determinations, you can drive yourself crazy. You can come up with a lot of explanations and interpretations that really are not right, and you can wind up being very hurt over it. Except to really rely on God for all those kinds of things, especially those areas that you don't have an answer to. And the third thing, and maybe the most important thing that I learned about God from this, God has a plan. God has a purpose for Jacob. He's got a purpose for Jacob's family. It's one that he promised to Isaac before him and one to Abraham before him. And the promise was this: I'm going to make a great nation out of you. I'm going to give you the land that you're sojourning in. And I'm going to bless all peoples through your family. One in particular that's coming later on. And I'm going to bless all peoples through you. And what we see in this chapter is God working to make that a reality in Abraham's family. But God is not prevented from accomplishing his purposes because you got a family that doesn't know how to treat each other. You've a family that names its boys out of the rivalry that they're experiencing with one another. God is still at work. And God is still going to accomplish his purposes for this world regardless of the mess that this family tries to make of God's purposes.
God will confound the wise.
He will confound the wise. He will turn it on its head. I don't know what it is that maybe there's some messes that are going on in your life right now. Most of us have messes going on a regular basis. It's just the way life is. And sometimes we attach those messes to either God's activity or God's inactivity in our lives. But I can tell you this, it doesn't matter what mess is going on. If you're looking to God, he will accomplish his purposes for you. He will accomplish what he intends for you and for your family. The messes don't get in his way. He begins what will become these 12 tribes of Israel, through which God will come to bring Jesus into the world. And so we have God always at work. Other thoughts? comments? Haberdasheries today. So, go on into chapter 30 and chapter 31 and this week. We're not going to get into it today because time is just about up. But the question I want you to ask, we'll come back to it next week. We'll come back to it next week. Jacob starts out the story as being a deceiver, a trickster, and a cheat. Read through chapter 30 and determine what kind of a man he becomes by that point. Does he still live by deception? Does he still live through cheating? Or is there something else that Jacob comes to depend on? And the question then becomes, if the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, what does it take to break the chain of poor attitudes, poor behaviors, poor heritages that are passed from generation to generation? In other words, if there are things that you still struggle with, man, I deal with anger just like my daddy did. Or I just can't stay with anything just like my mama. Or I just got real doubts in my faith just like my grandmother. Whatever it is that you sometimes struggle with about something that's been passed on to you in your family. Or it may be somebody that, children or grandchildren that struggle with the apple not falling far from the tree. What is it that it takes in order to break that chain? To break what is being passed on from generation to generation? Because I think if you'll read chapter 30 and go into 31, you may actually find a man in Jacob who breaks that chain of deception for his own life. How did he do it? And then we'll come back next week.
Through Christ.
No, he didn't know Jesus, and so that we can't.
Well,
You're right today. Yes. But how did Jacob? What secret did, I don't know what Jacob found, but what was the secret for Jacob? Go back, just kind of look at that. There's your assignment for this week. There will be a pop test at the beginning of class. We'll come back and talk more about Jacob next week. Thank you.